Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Howard E. Koch's The War of the Worlds, the 1938 radio script. Now, I am going to talk about this because for Sock Buskin, my community theater group that I'm involved with, I am in a performance of this. We're doing a live radio play. This is the script, right? If you know anything about the sort of history of radio, science fiction radio, this is the script that Orson Welles performed with the Mercury Theatre Company, I think. Yeah, Mercury Theatre Company. And famously, also probably not in reality, but famously, this sort of sparked a mass panic, right? This is the famous story that there was a mass panic. People really believed that Martians had descended on New Jersey, and people were just going fucking nuts, like panic in the streets. The reality is that almost certainly didn't happen. People have looked into this. They've investigated this quite a bit. There's a few reports of people, especially people in New Jersey, who were like, wait, is this real? Or what am I hearing right now? But for the most part, both at the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, they made clear that this was a radio performance. I mean, the opening begins with the announcer saying, "The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theatre on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theatre and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles." And then Welles actually ends. It's a really actually quite a nice ending. This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theatre's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, so we did the next best thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. The grinning, glowing, globular invader in your living room is an inhabitation of the pumpkin patch. And if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian. It's Halloween. So yeah, I mean, there wasn't really this sort of mass panic that stories spread suggesting there was, but it's still a really interesting and important piece of radio history, of science fiction history, etc., etc. In part because of that story, even though it wasn't true. So that being said, this play, compared to H.G. Wells' actual novel, even though this is based on Wells' novel, there are significant differences. One of which, of course, is that in Wells' novel, the Martians land in the UK, starting in Woking. In Koch's radio play, it's New Jersey. Now, that makes sense, because this is an American listening audience rather than a British listening audience, and so you put it in a place that they can imagine. Whatever, that's totally fine. We get a different kind of narrator. And actually there's a split, really, in the narrator. There's the narrator, Orson Welles, who actually in the script is just listed as Orson Welles. And then there's Professor Richard Pearson, which is actually the character I'm playing. I'm very excited about that. The fact that I get to play a character that Welles played is awesome, because I'm a big fan of Orson Welles. But Professor Pearson is an astronomer from Princeton University. The narrator of H.G. Wells's novel is a philosophical writer. So there's a very different starting point of where each of them comes from, right? Pearson is an expert on the planets, the stars, space, whatever it is, whatever sort of information he would have in 1938, he would be one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet, probably. The narrator of Wells's novel is smart. He's a philosopher, he's a philosophical writer, but he's not an expert on space, as he freely admits multiple times. So we do have that sort of difference. We get a lot more time and attention devoted in the radio play to the actual conflict with the Martians. So we have officers, we have gunners, we have observers, we have different people, we get sort of radio reports from different places and stuff like this. None of that is necessarily in the text itself. And none of the characters that are in this radio play are in Wells's novel. So there's all of that. But the basic plot line is the same, just on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Martians land in a field in New Jersey. They basically start taking over everything, destroying everything, major cities. They go to New York City. They basically take over all of New Jersey. Sorry, Martians. No, New Jersey's fine. You're cool, New Jersey. But they basically take over all of New Jersey. They destroy parts of New York City, at least, if not all of New York City, etc., etc. And then eventually, it looks like nothing can be done to stop them. Finally, they succumb to disease in basically the last minute of the radio play, the last minute or two. It's literally basically just like, yep, they all died of disease. Peace. So we get that. There's a little bit of maybe not the best balance in terms of the denouement here. But we do get a lot of text taken directly from Wells's novel. Like, Orson Welles' opening portion. He says, "We now know that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth with their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man had inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts of the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment." Now that is almost exactly the opening paragraph of Wells's novel. There's some differences, relatively minor differences, but basically they have taken it exactly, and so that actually really is good. But then there's other bits that are sort of decontextualized, changed around, whatever it is. So, for instance, toward the very end, there's this bit with Professor Pearson, after he's basically survived the Martian assaults, etc., etc., everything is devastated, and he meets this stranger. The stranger takes the place of Wells's artilleryman. So in this novel, there is a character, an artilleryman, that the narrator meets quite early on in the novel. They survive for a little bit together. They basically escape the Martians. And then they split up. And at the very end of the novel, the narrator finds this artilleryman again, hooks up with him, and the artilleryman has come up with this kind of insane plan to survive underground and then for humans to overthrow the Martians by taking some of their fighting machines and turning them against the Martians. Here, this is just a stranger, just a random fucking weird dude that Pearson runs into. Pearson has no reason to trust this guy or want to hang out with this guy or anything like this. And so we get that very strange element where what had made sense in the novel of sort of, hey, we knew each other, we were friends, we helped each other survive, let's hang out and help each other survive again. That element is gone here. We just have this stranger telling Pearson about this bizarre, somewhat unhinged plan. And so we do sort of lose that element of it. That being said, it's much of the radio play is similar to Wells's novel, but there are, again, these big differences in many cases. At the broadest brushstrokes, the story is the same. But there's definitely changes.